All right, everyone, welcome back to part 3 of Introduction to Insect Taxonomy. Today we're going to be talking about the arthropods and their sister groups or their close cousins. If you will remember, the last couple of times we were talking about the hierarchy of taxonomic groups, where we start at the very largest group, like this is all all of life, eukaryotic life, eukaryotes. And then we get more specific as we move down, and every group maintains the characteristics of. We're mostly talking about the arthropods, which is a phylum, Arthropoda, which is jointed legs. But we're also going to be talking about the intermediate groups, kind of like the superphylum, the subphylum, the superclass. And we usually refer to these as clades. And we talked about this a little bit last time. Clades are just groups of related species, or groups of related species. So groups of relations. And these aren't necessarily given a proper spot in the hierarchy, where we're talking about specifically a class or specifically a phylum, but it's more like an intermediate group, an informal intermediate group. Frequently, these clades are based on very broad sorts of physical and genetic characteristics, but it helps to talk about them in order to further subdivide very large groups. Because when we're talking about the arthropods, we are talking about 10 million plus species. So we'll want to divide that into smaller groups. And when we're talking about a super class like the Panarthropods, the Arthropods, or whatever, we're talking about even more species. So you're talking about 20 million plus species. So it helps to have further breakdown, and these intermediate levels are usually just referred to as clades. If you will also remember, we need to review what it means to talk about these sorts of cladistics or cladograms or these phylogenetic trees. The analogy is kind of like a family tree, where you have an ancestral group up here, and you have the descendants down here. So this is, I don't want to say descendants. Is that the proper way to say this? So you'll have an ancestral group that gives rise to the more modern groups, the descendant group, but it doesn't mean that the ancestral group has vanished. So it's not like your great grandmother died and it only left behind your grandparents or whatever. That's not how this works. Generally speaking, we will go through something called sympatric or allopatric speciation. So you'll have members of an ancestral group, and so these are members of, let's say, the arthropods, and it's kind of generic arthropods. And at some point, some population of them gets separated in some way. This is usually called allopatric speciation. I can't spell today, that's fine, ION. And you have some subgroup that then begins to break away and evolve, separate from the generic ancestral group. And because they are isolated reproductively, they start to develop different characteristics than the ancestral group. And so this group then becomes one group of arthropods, and this group becomes another group of arthropods. So this can be thought of as the spiders and the scorpions, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these phylogenetic trees. So we talked about this a little bit last time. We don't need to save that. So we're going to be talking about these higher order groups around the phylum level and the associated clades. So let's move into that. So we have kind of a generic clade called the Panarthropods. This includes all of the arthropods and their cousin groups. and from like this generic ancestral group, and we're talking about a very, very, very long time ago. The arthropods are an extremely old group, like beginning of life old group. These are really, really old. So this would have happened a long time ago. It divided into two different groups. You have the arthropods and their cousins, the tardigrades. If you don't know what a tardigrade is, you may have heard of these referred to as the water bears, which are pretty much everywhere. They're microscopic for the most part, and they live in kind of semi-aquatic environments. You'll frequently find them in like wet moss in forests. They are extremely resistant to environmental pressure. They can basically survive anything, including radiation blasts and extreme cold and all of that stuff. And they are closely related to the arthropods, which we will be going into in more depth. The other thing that they are related to is the onychophores. The onychophora are sometimes referred to as the velvet worms. And if you're not a biologist, you've probably never seen one of these. They're fairly large, but they only live in the tropics. There's not very many species of them. There's only about 200 species left. This is a very primitive group. And they are soft-bodied, worm-like, with legs. They do have legs. They're somewhere in between like a worm and a millipede, and they come in crazy colors. So the velvet worm looks like this. You'll mostly find these in like Central and South America and like Southeast Asia. And they're really neat. So they come in crazy colors. They're frequently things like purple and pink. They're covered in these very fine hair-like cilia that make them very, very soft to the touch. You can see they have all of these legs. They kind of look like a millipede. And these are, like you can see, like they're not quite arthropods. They don't have this really hard exoskeleton. They don't really have the jointed legs, but they're not really a worm either. They're somewhere in the middle. And they're usually covered, their mouths are really funny looking. I should have gotten a picture of it for you. They're covered in these papillae. They look like, almost like if they were like a child's gel toy. Like they look like they have little tentacles. They're very, very strange creatures. I've never seen one alive. I've seen them in collections. I've seen them, hot pink and lavender, and they just come in strange colors. The tardigrades, on the other hand, tend to be very, very small. They tend to have 6 legs, 3 on each side, and they have these little snoots that they can suck up their food with, and they just kind of hang around in aquatic environments. There's been a lot of research done on them through NASA because they are so resistant to the hostile environments in space. They can basically survive anything, but again, you can kind of see that it's arthropod-like, it's insect-like. It's not in the group arthropods, but it's bug-like, right? You can clearly see that this is somewhat related, and it is related morphologically and genetically. Like they are very, they do have a lot of similarities with the other arthropods, but they are unique enough that we've given them their own group. So that leaves us with the arthropods. So we have to ask the question, what do the arthropods have in common? So generally speaking, they have exoskeletons made of chitin, right? So chitin is a complex carbohydrate chain that they use to form their exoskeleton, usually making it more solid with calcium carbonate as well as melanin. And they shed this exoskeleton between life stages, so they have to shed the exoskeleton in order to get bigger and to grow. They also have jointed appendages, hence the name arthropod. So when you think of like crab's legs, where it's multiple creepy joints, they all have that in common. They have open circulatory systems, open circulation. So they have a heart, but they don't have blood vessels for the most part. They generally have antennae, one or two pairs, depending on the group. They are segmented bodies is the big one, right? And if you go to my, I have a series on insect morphology. In the first couple of sections of insect morphology, we talk about body segmentation. It's really important in arthropods. So you'll have the head and repeating body segments. And each of these body segments is made up of generally a leg or a pair of legs, one on each side. They have a nervous system, ganglion. So that's not on the back, sorry. This is the heart. They'll have a heart running down the back. They'll have a gut running down the middle. And they will have a nervous ganglion running down the venter. And the body segments are basically mirror repeats of each other in the ancestral groups. Each of these segments is called a metamer. The process of the formation of these segments repeating is called metamerization. And in most arthropods, what has occurred, especially the more complex arthropods, is that you'll go through a process called tagmosis, where tagma, where you will have body segments begin fusing together to form larger body sections. So you'll have, the head will be formed up of like 8 segments forming the head. Then you'll have a thorax, tagma known as the thorax, which is used for movement, which will usually be like the next 3, and like in insects, it'd be the next 3. And then you'd have another tagma called the abdomen. And you have this sort of specialization of body segments, and so you have smaller segments called the metameres, and then you have the larger sections called the tagma. And this is common through all of the arthropods. There are other characteristics. So, for instance, arthropods will frequently, like in the primitive sense, they have 7 pairs of legs that get reduced over time. So that's 7 pairs of legs. As well as, they tend to be on land. Well, the insects are on land, the crustaceans tend to be in water, and things like that. There's other things that they have in common, but we're not going to go into all of those. So, so the arthropods would be, like this would be an example. So this is an ironclad beetle. They're called ironclads. They are extremely hard. They have this extremely thick exoskeleton on their body. It's so hard that you can't get insect pins through it. You generally you'd need like a hammer and a nail to get through it. You have these jointed appendages. Let me go to a different color here. You have these jointed appendages. You can see all of the leg segments. Here's another segment, here's another segment, here's another segment, here's another segment. Lots and lots of jointed appendages. You have 3 major body groups. You have the head here. You have the thorax here, and then you'd have the abdomen, which is covered in the wings in the back. And those body segments are made up of further smaller metameres. So the abdomen in most beetles is like 6 to 8 sections, and then the thorax is 3, that's where the legs come out. So this would be just kind of a generic arthropod, right? Although things like crabs don't look like this. Okay, so, well, what about so we're not going to talk anymore about the onychophorans or the tardigrades. Those are not our concern. Today we are concerned with the arthropods. So we go down another level. So now you have, this is phylum. This is the phylum level. Up here we were talking about, this would just be a clade. Now we're moving down to the phylum level. So this would be like superphylum. We're moving down a level. So the arthropods can be divided into 2 large groups based primarily on their mouth parts, although they also have a lot of other divisions within it as far as characteristics which define each group. But the mouth parts are really important. You have the mandibulata and the chelicerata. The mandibulata have mandibles, hence the name, and the chelicerata have chelicerae. So the chelicera is a modified jaw that moves up and down, versus mandibles tend to move side to side. So the chelicerata, let's start with the chelicerata because we're going to be talking about this more next time. The chelicerata would be the spiders and their cousins. So you have spiders and scorpions and whip scorpions and pseudoscorpions and mites and ticks and sulfugi and all sorts of things within the chelicerata. So this would be here. So you have your tarantula here. The chelicerata have other things in common. They have 6 sets of limbs. And you're thinking, but how is that possible? Spiders have 8 legs, so they should have 4 sets, right? No. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These aren't their legs, these are their palps. 6. These are the chelicerae. Usually we call them fangs. So these are the spider's fangs. The spider's fangs are the modified jaw that moves up and down. If you zoom in on this bad boy, you can, the actual fang would be right here. So they'd be, the little vampire fangs. But the actual limb attached to it is called the chelicerae, or are called the chelicerae. So they also generally have 2 body segments. They have the cephalothorax and the abdomen, whereas things like insects would have 3 body segments. And that's kind of the some of the defining characteristics of the chelicerata. We will talk more about the chelicerata next time, just to go over spiders and friends, so that you have a better understanding of the differences between the chelicerata and the mandibulata. The mandibulata have, like I said, have the mandibles. And the mandibulata are made up of the pancrustacea and the myriapods. The pancrustacea, pan meaning all, this is basically the crustaceans, hence the name, and the hexapods, which are the insects and friends. In the pancrustaceans, there are more groups of crustaceans than of insects, more higher order groups, but the insects are the vast majority of the actual species. So like I've been saying, there's like 10 million species of insects, and there's, let's just go with the known numbers. So there's between 1 and 1.5 million known species of insects. When I say 10 million, those are the estimates of how many are actually out there that we haven't found yet. There's between 1 and 1.5 million identified, described, named species of insects. There's about 60,000 of crustaceans, and 60 to 70,000 crustaceans probably, and there's 1 to 1.5 million of these. So you can definitely see there's way more insects and friends, but the name is called pancrustacea because there's a lot more groups within the crustaceans that make up pancrustacea than there are of insects. So there's, if you ever look at the crustaceans, and we will be talking about the crustaceans at some point, this is, like I talked about last time, this is paraphyletic. It is not all groups are represented not all groups that have ancestors or all groups that have descendants are represented within the ancestral group, the crustaceans. And whereas insects are monophyletic. So all insects are related directly, not all crustaceans are related directly, if that makes any sense. But that might be confusing. I talked about the cladistics a little bit last time, and we'll talk about that more coming up in another video, but that's why this name exists as it is, why it's not called like Pan insecta or something like that. But also the crustaceans seem to be the ancestral group. So it seems like crustaceans gave rise to insects. Insects did not give rise to crustaceans. It's only in one direction. The crustaceans were here first, and they ended up basically colonizing the land and turning into insects. The myriapods, if you haven't figured out, it's myriad legs or myriad feet. These are the millipedes and the centipedes. They have lots and lots of legs. So myriad or myria is many, or more specifically 10,000. So these are the things with many, many legs. So let's talk about the myriapods first, and then we'll talk about the crustaceans. The myriapods, what do they have in common? They have lots and lots of kind of undifferentiated segments. So they have a lot of these metameres that aren't specialized. They have lots and lots of legs, right? Centipedes are a body section with one pair of legs per section, and millipedes are 2 pairs of legs per section. That's why the millipedes have twice as many legs, which is why they look like they have so many legs compared to the centipedes. But they also only have one set of antennae, and they have simple eyes, whereas insects have compound eyes. Simple eyes. So that's how they differentiate themselves from something like the insects, which also have one set of antennae, but they only have 6 legs and compound eyes. Something like the crustaceans are differentiated in that they have 2 sets of antennae. They do have, I believe they have a compound eye. Let me check. Yes, they do have compound eyes. They have compound eyes. What is interesting with them is that they also have biramous appendages. And what that means is some of their appendages are split in half. So like here. On the shrimp, it's kind of the front appendages. Back here, you can see some of these biramous appendages. Not all of their appendages, but many of them have a forked ending, and we call this the biramous appendage. Crustaceans also have gills, or a gill like lung, which they use to breathe, whereas something like the myriapods have a tracheal system. Basically, they have holes on the side of their body that they can passively infuse air through instead of gills, and insects have the same thing. So that covers all, so as you can see, there's lots of different forms of crustaceans, and we'll be talking about a lot of these later. But that would be the major groups of the arthropods. So you have the Mandibulata and the chelicerate, and then within the Mandibulata, you have the pancrustacea, which is the insects and crustaceans, and you have the millipedes and centipedes, known as the myriapods. When I was learning this way back when, this was before we understood the pancrustacea as a group. This information kind of came out in 2010, and then it was later confirmed as the dominant theory of the evolution of the crustaceans into the insects. Originally, it was arthropods were divided into the Mandibulata, the chelicerate, and the crustaceans. We thought the crustaceans were their own thing. Turns out they are mandibulates, and they're the dominant ancestral group of the insects. So the ancestor up here is the insects and the crustaceans. So things change just in the last 15 years. We've definitely developed a better understanding of this, and a lot of that understanding is not based off of morphology, but genetics revealed a lot of the stuff, and then it was later confirmed through morphological dissections and things like that. So I'm going to stop there today, and then next time we're probably going to dive more into the chelicerate. And after we talk about that for one section, so that you have a better understanding of the spiders and friends, we'll talk about the pancrustacea and the crustaceans in more specificity. And with that, I'll talk to you guys later.